Last night we hosted a piano recital right here in the sanctuary. It was a fundraising concert for aid to Ukraine. The Swampscott Piano School has been having recitals here for years, and their teacher, Valerie Henkin, is Ukrainian. So this was a very special recital, and those of us who were here were just amazed by the talent. I was telling David, if he needs to take the weekend off sometime, I would have some of these little tiny kids come in. I mean, they were fantastic, just blown away by their talent. Two little brothers, I think they might have been twins, they looked like they were about third grade age, went up in succession. They were sitting right over there and absolutely nailed their pieces by Bach, Tchaikovsky, Chopin, and Rachmaninoff. The whole concert was like that, young children just flooring you with their artistry and talent. But I really enjoyed also watching the boy's mother over there against the wall as she watched her sons play. Her hands moved with theirs. Her fingers came down with each chord. She tapped rhythm and she conducted. I mean, she lived each note with her children. And when they were finished with their pieces and went over there to sit next to her, she kept stern and loving watch over them if they fidgeted or talked. There was a lot of the mom arm and the mom hand on the head. I don't have any way of knowing her story, of course, but she was, to my imagination, the kind of mother who wanted very much to be one, to have children, to take on that intense, emotional and practical and constant demand of motherhood. The boy's father was there too, also very engaged, also proud, also doing dad arm at times. It's what we want for every child. Parents who want them. It's what every child deserves. Over the years, I have given many Mother's Day sermons. I have given some sermons on reproductive rights. I've told stories that I inherited and been entrusted with. I have shared information. I've given exegesis of the biblical commandment from the book of Deuteronomy, which gets trotted out for every argument against reproductive choice. And it goes like this. And this is supposedly in the voice of God. I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. And in all of those sermons and talks, I have considered with my congregations the way that the United States of America continuously does not choose life, chooses poverty and death for its people and especially its children. If the Christian zealots in leadership, including those on the Supreme Court, really chose life, they would not consistently support and enact policies that do not support health care, social support systems for families, equal wages for women, environmental protections that would help make the actual planet habitable for the children who are already alive, and so on and so on and so on. Those were all sermons that I was able to craft and deliver in a coherent way, I like to think, as I continued to be involved in reproductive rights in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Massachusetts. But I got a little lax because here in Massachusetts, it's never really been under threat. And the issue of reproductive freedom is not as keen for us here as it was in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. So when I lived in Maryland, I was for a time on the Clergy Advisory Committee for the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And 20 years ago, I stood on the steps of the Maryland State House and called George W. Bush and other forced birth legislators fetus worshipers. My mother was worried about my safety. and asked if there would be a police presence there that night that I spoke. And I said there would be, but no, I would not be wearing a bulletproof vest, as she hoped I could. I'm less coherent now in 2022. I am tired. I am angry. I'm not shocked by the proposed wholesale overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, as we learned is planned, as we learned this week. Did anybody not know this? Because maybe you were too busy and not following the news? Okay, you all know this. I'm not surprised either by the legislation outlawing IUDs that has just come to the Louisiana State House. I'm tired myself of being a heterosexual single woman who has been dating men but very intentionally never married, on a constant personal woman's march against the casual, joking sexism and the more hostile, targeted misogyny that I have experienced escalating over the past 20 years as women have continued to make gains in education, political leadership, financial stability on their own, real sexual liberation, and choosing to live happily on their own rather than settle for really frustrating relationships or marriages. It's just living our lives. I want to invite into this sacred space my Mother Shirley in spirit. Come on in, Mom. My mom was both a negative example and a difficult person in my life, and she was also, of course, the reason for my life and my biggest champion. Like so many parent-child relationships are, ours was paradoxical. On one hand, my mother fiercely encouraged me to be whoever I needed to be. She always emphasized that being a wife and a mother was one option I might pursue for my life. They were the only options presented to her, though. And so she always said, you make up your own life, honey. You do what you feel called to do and be. And she never ever insinuated that I should give her grandchildren. She loved her grand dog and her grand cat. On the other hand, when I was growing up as a strong little girl, my mother constantly was telling me, tone it down. Lower your voice. And this is really, really key, she spent her entire life being miserable about her overweight body and obsessing about my body size. And this is a generational obsession that is very damaging. There is a reason that I apply a full face of makeup and do my hair every Sunday, because I'm Shirley's daughter. And here is how we do it. I just thought I'd sort of like lift the veil a little bit on what it is to be a woman, and some of the things that are kind of invisible. Okay, first, skincare products. Vitamin C brightening serum, peptide serum, SPF lotion. And then we do foundation. And then concealer under the eyes, have to look bright and awake. We do eyebrow pencil, eyeshadow base, then eyeshadow, then eyeliner. Then I curl my lashes, because Mom taught me how to do that. And then we get mascara. Next is contour. Give yourself some cheekbones. Then some highlighter. Dabs of liquid blush, powder over everything. Lip liner, lip cream that stays on so that you can spend the day at church, talking and visiting, and you still have lip color, topped by lip gloss. By the time you see me at 10 a.m., I have at least 18 products on my face. Not to mention the hair products, the hair curling, the attempts to get it under control, to spray, etc. Because to be Shirley's daughter is to understand that we get ready to be seen in public. We put on our face. It is also to love high femme things like makeup, even though we know that that can be a capitulation to the beauty norms and expectations of femininity imposed by patriarchal standards. In my 25 years of ministry, I have about a ratio of 5 comments about my appearance to 1 comment about the content of my teaching, my sermons, prayers, and writings. It's just an informal guess. Men ministers don't report the same ratio, by the way. I'm not tired of putting on my makeup. I really enjoy it. I'm tired of putting on a nice face, of tolerance, for again, what I have seen as the rapidly rising hostility towards women that I have watched escalate from my Woman's March and as a feminist religious leader. To think we could see a day when a woman on the Supreme Court would overturn the rights of women to make private medical decisions, to replenish, and I'm quoting Amy Coney Barrett here, the domestic supply of infants available for adoption. It's chilling. The dystopian alarm we feel is not unwarranted. Millennials are now approaching the age of 40. Can you believe it? And they are the generation with the lowest birth rate. The birth rate in the US declined 20% between 2007 and 2020. Choose life? Replenish? What? With the climate crisis, stagnant wages, staggering levels of educational debt, exorbitant housing costs, legitimate anxieties about being financially wiped out by a health crisis, losing your health insurance if you leave your job. Women and couples are making decisions to nurture life in ways that don't involve procreation. But the Supreme Court would have it otherwise. The religious right has been strategizing to punish women for daring to live lives uncircumscribed by the conservative Christian agenda and sense of what a woman's life, or anybody with a uterus's life, is for. Motherhood and wifehood, that's it. And they are very intentionally doing whatever they need to, including lying, undermining the Constitution, restricting voting rights, and engaging in misinformation and propaganda campaigns to mobilize their communities to terrorize anyone with a uterus who seeks access to reproductive health services. And I use the language of anyone with a uterus because there are trans people whose lives are also caught up in this. We can't forget and exclude them. I may have already told you that my mother had 3 abortions as a young woman, illegal and unsafe. And I tell you this because Shirley wanted me to share her story in religious settings, because she felt it was inexcusable and disgusting how ignorant she was about her own body, how her own religious tradition taught that women do not have their own agency, and because she was raised in the 50s when bodily autonomy for women was not emphasized. She was never given information she needed to be sexually responsible. She was taught to be beautiful, to be an object of desire, to get a good man and become a wife and a mother. Shirley used to go to anti-choice protests outside the Planned Parenthood and yell back at the chanting. She stood there, all 5'3" of her. If you met her at my installation, you remember how much we physically resemble each other. She would be telling these self-righteous zealots off, yelling her own story, challenging them, berating them, cussing them out. She would come home hoarse, and if not satisfied, at least having spoken her mind. She encouraged me to do more than that with my own life, to become a leader, to stand not anonymously outside the clinics yelling and the halls of power, but to be publicly out in front, with status of reverend conferred upon me by a congregation in an historically and unwaveringly pro-choice religious tradition that ordained women before anyone else in the United States and that has affirmed again and again in our General Assemblies the right of every person to complete reproductive freedom. She was very proud of that. She always centered that in why she was proud to have a daughter in leadership in Unitarian Universalist religious life. Here's the kind of rhetoric we're hearing in the past days. This was a doozy. This was my favorite from Republican Florida Senator Matt Gaetz. How many of the women, this is a tweet, how many of the women rallying against overturning Roe are overeducated, underloved millennials who sadly returned from protests to a lonely microwave dinner with their cats and no Bumble matches? And Bumble is an online dating app. Matt is currently under investigation for sleeping with a minor and transporting her across state lines, by the way. So apparently he prefers his women to only maybe have a high school education, I guess. Now, I myself, I never returned sadly from protests. I'm also Generation X, so I'm older than the women Matt's going after. I usually have dinner with friends or parishioners afterwards, and then I go home to my tranquil home. I hug my 3 diplomas and I cry into my cat's fur, I guess, right? No, I don't. The truth is, I was kicked off Bumble for telling crass jerks that they were crass jerks in much the same language my mother used, shouting down the anti-choice protesters in front of the Planned Parenthood. Women and our allies, being well-behaved and giving permission to be walked all over, objectified, deprived of our bodily autonomy, disrespected, forced and coerced into roles and relationships we do not choose, is not the way for all souls to grow into harmony with the divine. Affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all people does not need to be polite, accommodating, and conciliatory. The stakes are way too high. In coming weeks and months, I will be rejoining the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice in a more intentional way. I will be learning about safe abortion access networks and how pro-choice advocates can stockpile medications that will allow pregnant people to self-administer safe abortions at home. I will be advocating for single women of childbearing years to abstain from procreative sex because there is no 100% safe form of birth control, and am already involved in creating scripts that they can use with dismayed partners. We know there will be retaliation. There will be violence against women, which is already a crisis. Every single one of us needs to know this. I'm glad to see some younger people here. I'm so glad. This is so much part of your generational experience. Too many clergy in many religious traditions have used their pulpits to oppress women, to to inform them that their sexuality, unless employed for the ultimate goal of birthing children, was a sin. They have counseled women from their pulpits to stay in abusive marriages and told them that using contraception was evil. As for me and my church, we are called to challenge and upend those messages at every turn. In my mother's memory, and the memory of all women who have suffered under misogynistic doctrines, I swear it for myself. I hope you will join me. We are all tired of marching. Take a breath, take a strong dose of caffeine or whatever keeps you going, Let's get ready to get back out there. We are life's children, and she calls us forth. Amen.